Imagine that all your trust in your own family has turned against you. And when you stand before the judge, your opponent isn't a stranger, but the son of a man who writes the laws for the entire country. The municipal courtroom in Providence hums like a tired refrigerator, air vent whispering, someone clearing a throat 2 rows back, the soft click of a pen that can't find rest. Judge Caprio reads the file with a calm that feels like good weather before a storm. On paper, it's nothing, a no parking zone beside City Hall, an $85 ticket, a weekday morning. Across from him stands Margaret Kelly, 60, widow's black ring circling a pale finger that never got used to being alone. Her cardigan is careful, her posture tidy from years of hospital floors and quiet rooms. The citation is in her name. The driver was not. Mrs. Kelly, Caprio says, voice warm but searching, you say you weren't behind the wheel. Why is the notice addressed to you? She lifts her chin as if to steady a tray she can't drop. Because the car isn't entirely mine anymore. The words fall and don't bounce. A murmur flutters, then disappears. She explains, haltingly, she'd lent the sedan to her nephew for a quick bank errand, 10 minutes, he'd said. The ticket came later. So did a call that wasn't returned, and another after that. The young man's name surfaces like a bad memory finally given air. Alex, Morris, she says, and her eyes drift, just once, toward the door. Senator Morris's son. The room tightens. Even the overhead lights seem to listen. Caprio's pen stops. No frown, no theatrics, just an attentive lean. Are you afraid to say his name? I don't want trouble, Margaret says, and the word trembles on its way out. I've had enough of that. He looks back to the ticket, then to her. This began as a parking matter, he says gently. But I'm hearing something else. She nods, swallowing. I thought I was helping. He told me it would be quick. A simple thing, keys pressed into a familiar palm, an errand near the rotunda, a promise to return by noon. In her telling, you can hear the old gratitude of a boy she once fed, the holidays she hosted when his father was in Washington, the quiet pride of a woman who never asked for more than good manners and a call on Sundays. And yet the car is not yours, Caprio prompts. Not the way it used to be, she says. Some papers were signed. I didn't mean for that to happen. The quiet grows heavier. You can hear a shoe scuff, a bailiff's measured breath. Margaret's face doesn't break, but there's a held-back thunder in it, the kind that gathers behind the eyes of people who keep their voice steady to survive. This isn't about $85, she adds, softer now. It's about what's left of my name. Caprio closes the folder. He lets the pause sit long enough for everyone to understand the scale has shifted. Fine print can feel like handcuffs, family can feel like a door that locks from the outside. Mrs. Kelly, he says, will find out why the ticket found you. She nods once, grateful and wary at the same time. In the packed silence, the small sounds return, the vent, the pen, the cough, but they're changed, like background noise after a diagnosis. The case is still a ticket. The harm is not. And somewhere beyond the courtroom doors, a young man with a famous last name is counting on that difference to keep the world quiet. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel. I never thought that a set of car keys would become the beginning of my humiliation. Margaret's voice is steady, but there's that tiny quiver that travels through the air before landing somewhere deep in the chest of every listener. Judge Caprio leans forward slightly, the way he does when something inside him recognizes quiet pain disguised as composure. After her husband died 3 years earlier, Margaret worked part-time at the local clinic. The smell of antiseptic and the rhythm of heart monitors were familiar comforts, things that stayed the same when everything else in her life had changed. No children, no inheritance, just her little house and the 2008 sedan her husband once called our retirement chariot. Alex Morris had been like a son. When he was 14, his father, Senator Morris, was already living half his life in Washington. Margaret had fed the boy, helped with his homework, sat through his school plays when no one else from the Morris family came. She still remembered the year he turned 18, the shy gratitude in his eyes when she bought him a winter coat. A few months ago, Alex had come to her doorstep again. Same smile, same boyish charm, but older now, hair slicked back, a whiff of expensive cologne that didn't belong in her modest living room. He'd said he was starting a new job, needed a car, and there was a temporary mix-up with his credit due to the campaign audit of his father's office. He just needed her signature, as a formality. I trusted him, she tells the judge quietly. I didn't even put on my glasses. I just signed where he pointed. A week later, an envelope from the bank arrived, thick paper, her name printed in bold at the top. A new auto loan, $18,000. The make and model matched her old sedan, but the VIN number didn't. When she called the bank, the voice on the other end told her she was the listed owner and liable for payment. Her first instinct wasn't anger. It was disbelief, followed by embarrassment. She thought she must have misunderstood something. When she called Alex, he didn't answer. When she texted, he wrote, "Don't worry, Aunt M, it's all under control." Under control. The phrase kept echoing long after the phone went silent. She pauses in her testimony. The courtroom is still. He used to call me his second mom, she says, and her throat tightens. Then he just disappeared. Judge Caprio's tone remains calm, but his next question lands like a gavel. Did you contact the senator? I tried, she replies. His assistant said it was a private matter. That the senator couldn't risk unnecessary attention. 2 months later, another letter arrived, this one about a different vehicle, also registered under her name. Then another, from a loan company she'd never heard of. Each one a reminder that her signature had opened more than a door, it had built a trap. And then came the detail that made the air in the courtroom shift. One of the signatures, she says softly, was mine. The other 2 weren't. But they looked enough like mine that even I had to stare twice. Caprio studies the photocopy in the file, tracing the fake loop of an M with his thumb. He looks back at her. Mrs. Kelly, that's forgery, he says gently, not accusingly. She nods, eyes lowered. I know. I just never thought the person I loved like a son would need to forge my name. The weight of her words settles over everyone present. The case that began as a parking ticket now carries the smell of corruption, the kind that hides in smiles and signatures. Somewhere behind her, a woman exhales sharply, a sound of disbelief. Margaret doesn't turn. She just adds, almost to herself, I thought love was enough to make people honest. No one answers. Not even the judge. The silence in the room has its own verdict. I started noticing that little things just didn't fit anymore. Margaret's words come slower now, deliberate, as though she's choosing each one like a fragile object she's afraid to drop. Judge Caprio listens without interrupting, hands folded loosely, eyes steady. It began with the mail. Envelopes she didn't recognize, insurance claims, toll violations, notices of minor accidents in cities she'd never visited. At first, she assumed it was clerical error, the kind of bureaucratic mix-up that corrects itself with a polite phone call. But each call led to another dead end, another polite voice telling her, "Ma'am, according to our records, that's your vehicle." Then came the night call. A police officer from Warwick, polite but firm, asking why her car had been spotted near a casino at 3:40 in the morning. She'd been asleep in her small bedroom, a book half open on the nightstand. I don't even drive after dark, she told him. The officer hesitated, then said softly, "Well, someone using your plate does." She tried to reach Alex. Straight to voicemail. The next day his number was disconnected. His social media accounts, gone. Deleted. It was as if he'd never existed, except she kept seeing his face, on TV, next to his father, smiling like nothing in the world could touch him. The senator was speaking about restoring public ethics, the caption read. Margaret's mouth tightened when she saw it. I realized then, she tells the court, he wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding behind him. Judge Caprio looks up from his notes. You believe your name was used to shield someone else's actions? I don't believe, she says quietly. I know. She explains what she's pieced together over sleepless nights. Alex had been buying cars under her credit, reselling them through intermediaries, people who vanished as fast as the paperwork was signed. Her address was the constant, her signature the perfect cover. And then Caprio asks something that makes her pause mid-sentence. Mrs. Kelly, he says, do you know who paid your last fine? She blinks, confused. My last fine. He lifts a page from the file, turns it toward her. A canceled check, crisp under the fluorescent lights. The handwriting neat, almost formal. The signature, Senator Thomas Morris. The entire room freezes. The murmur that follows sounds like the beginning of a storm, whispers, disbelief, a few gasps quickly stifled. Margaret stares at the paper as if it's a photograph of something terrible yet undeniable. I never asked him to, she whispers. I know you didn't, Caprio says softly. Which makes it all the more curious why he would. The judge's gaze holds her for a long moment. He doesn't need to raise his voice, the weight of his tone does the work. It looks, he says slowly, as though someone is trying very hard to keep this matter away from public record. No one moves. The air seems thinner, charged. Margaret feels her pulse in her throat. For a moment, she thinks about walking away, letting it all slide into quiet again. It would be easier, no questions, no spotlight, no danger. But then she remembers her husband's hands, the way he used to tell her, truth doesn't need armor, just someone brave enough to carry it. When she finally speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper, but it cuts through the silence. If they're trying to bury this, she says, then maybe it's time someone started digging. Judge Caprio closes the file, eyes still on her. Around them, the courtroom holds its breath. The story that began with an $85 ticket has become something else entirely, a glimpse of power protecting itself, and a widow with nothing left to lose deciding that silence is no longer an option. I thought the worst was behind me. But then two men in dark suits rang my doorbell. It was a gray Thursday morning. The kind of quiet day that asks for tea and silence. Instead, there was a knock, 3 short, deliberate raps. When Margaret opened the door, the men were already flashing their badges. State Financial Inspection Division. Their shoes gleamed, their smiles didn't. Mrs. Kelly, said the taller one, you're listed in an ongoing investigation into the laundering of funds through vehicle transactions. We'd like to ask you a few questions. The word struck harder than any accusation. Laundering. Funds. Investigation. She couldn't even process them. There must be a mistake, she whispered, gripping the doorknob as if it could anchor her to the floor. The shorter agent, brown hair, quiet eyes, spoke more softly. We understand you might have acted under someone else's influence. But we'll need names. That word, names, hung between them like a threat disguised as mercy. Margaret hesitated, feeling her pulse against the thin skin of her wrist. Silence, she realized, wasn't safety anymore. It was complicity. Then, as they were about to leave, the taller man leaned closer, his tone barely audible. A word of advice, he murmured. Don't mention Senator Morris in your statement. You'll only hurt yourself. Cases like this, vanish. She met his gaze and saw it, fear, not cruelty. He wasn't warning her to protect her, he was warning her because he couldn't protect her. After they left, she sat in her living room for a long time, watching the curtain sway in the faint autumn draft. The house, usually her refuge, now felt bugged by ghosts. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, seemed to ask, what will you do now? By evening, she had her answer. She walked to the courthouse without an appointment, the wind pushing against her like resistance itself. Her hands trembled as she asked to see Judge Caprio. The secretary looked startled but, after a pause, nodded and led her in. Caprio stood by his desk, reading glasses low on his nose. When he saw her, he gestured for her to sit. "You shouldn't be here after hours, Mrs. Kelly," he said softly. "But since you are, talk to me." Her voice cracked at first. "If I tell the truth, they'll destroy me," she said. "But if I stay silent, I'll destroy myself." He didn't speak right away. The clock on his wall ticked 6 slow seconds before he finally said, "Truth is always dangerous. But if you don't speak it, someone else will use it as a weapon." She looked up at him then, eyes shining with the kind of clarity that comes after despair. "I'm done being afraid," she whispered. It was Senator Morris. And his son. For a moment, there was no sound at all. Even the faint buzz of the fluorescent light seemed to fade. Caprio didn't flinch, didn't reach for his pen. He simply nodded once, as if confirming something he'd suspected all along. "You understand," he said quietly, "this changes everything." "I know," she replied. And for the first time, her voice didn't shake. He smiled, tired, proud, human. "Then let's make sure it changes the right things." Later, as she walked out into the cool Providence night, she felt something she hadn't felt in months, not safety, but purpose. Behind her, the courthouse lights flickered in the windows like distant lanterns. Inside, Judge Caprio stood alone, looking down at the empty chair she'd just left. The echo of her words lingered in the air, heavier than any verdict: "Silence is a crime too. When I started searching for the truth, it began searching for me too." Margaret said it later, half in disbelief, half in awe of how deeply she'd already stepped into something far larger than herself. After that night with Judge Caprio, sleep became a stranger. Every knock, every letter drop, every car passing outside her window felt loaded with meaning. Still, she couldn't stop. At the clinic, between patient rounds, she reached out to an old colleague, Eleanor Price, a retired accountant who now volunteered in administration. Eleanor had sharp eyes, the kind that could see deceit hiding in decimals. When Margaret explained everything, the woman didn't flinch. She simply said, "Bring me the papers." They spent 3 evenings hunched over the kitchen table, the glow of a single lamp washing over receipts, contracts, and credit statements. And there it was, numbers that shouldn't exist. Transfers from Margaret's credit line to accounts labeled Morrison Campaign Fund. Each payment small enough to slip under attention, but together they painted something unmistakable: political money, scrubbed clean through her name. Margaret stared at the lines on the page until they blurred. "They used me," she whispered. Eleanor didn't answer, she didn't have to. A week later, Margaret returned to the courthouse carrying a heavy box of documents, each one a fragment of her stolen life. When she set it down before Judge Caprio, the papers made a sound like thunder muffled by wood. He picked up a single page, his glasses sliding slightly as he read. The courtroom, unusually full that morning, was silent except for the whisper of paper against paper. Then he looked up. His expression had changed, no longer the measured calm of a municipal judge, but something colder, more deliberate. "Mrs. Kelly," he said, "this isn't just a debt. It's political laundering." The air in the room thickened. Journalists at the back exchanged quick glances, pens ready. Caprio continued, his tone quiet but electric. "This document links a public campaign fund to a private credit account. Yours." For a moment, Margaret couldn't breathe. Her name, written in looping blue ink, looked alien, like a forged version of her own existence. Then the storm began. Reporters called out questions. Caprio raised a hand for silence. "This court," he said, "will refer the evidence to Providence Police for immediate review." That was unheard of. A municipal judge bypassing the state line to call in law enforcement, it was more than a procedural risk, it was an act of defiance. The courtroom buzzed like a live wire. That night, as Margaret returned home, her phone rang. No number, just silence for 3 seconds. And then a man's voice, calm, deliberate: "You don't understand what you've done. He's a senator. You're nobody." The line went dead. She sat at her kitchen table for a long time, staring at the box of papers. Her fear felt physical, like a hand pressing against her chest. And yet beneath it, something stronger stirred, anger mixed with pride. For the first time, she saw the weight of what she'd uncovered not as her curse, but as her power. The next morning, when she walked into court, the crowd looked different. People she'd never met, teachers, veterans, retirees, sat quietly, their faces lit with something she hadn't seen in months, belief. Judge Caprio greeted her with a nod that said we're not alone anymore. The faint rustle of documents on his desk sounded almost like applause. Across the aisle, a young woman wiped a tear. An older couple whispered, "She's brave." Margaret didn't feel brave. But when she looked at those faces, ordinary people who'd seen too much of power's impunity, she understood what they were really waiting for, proof that one voice could still matter. And she was ready to give it to them. When truth finally steps into the light, someone always tries to turn it off. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity that morning. Journalists lined the back wall, cameras balanced on shoulders. A low hum filled the air, half anticipation, half fear. Judge Caprio took his seat, face composed but taut with quiet gravity. This wasn't a parking violation anymore. This was a battle between conscience and power. "Proceed," he said. The senator's attorney stood, all polish and confidence, a smile sharpened to precision. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Kelly, appears to have misunderstood the documents in question. She willingly co-signed those loans. No coercion. No fraud. Just a generous gesture that she now regrets." Murmurs rippled through the room. Margaret sat still, hands folded tightly in her lap. The lawyer's tone dripped with civility, the kind that hides a sneer. Caprio's gaze was steady. "We'll need originals," he said. The attorney smirked. "Of course." He opened a folder, producing neat copies, too neat. Margaret didn't move until Caprio gestured. "Mrs. Kelly, you have something to add?" Her hand trembled slightly as she reached into her own folder. "Yes, Your Honor. I brought my copy." She held up a single sheet, creased, faded, bearing a date 3 days earlier than the one in the lawyer's file. The room collectively leaned forward. Caprio compared them side by side. The difference was small, a signature dated before Margaret's supposed bank visit. "Impossible." He looked up slowly. "You're telling me she signed this form before she even received it?" The lawyer hesitated, lips parting, searching for words that refused to come. Then came the sound, a whisper swelling into a wave, gasps, disbelief, outrage. Someone shouted, "Shame." Another voice followed, "They forged it." The attorney's composure cracked, the practiced smile collapsing under the weight of the moment. Caprio rapped his gavel once. "Order." He waited until the crowd settled, though the tension remained alive, pulsing. "This case," he said evenly, "has outgrown this court. But before it leaves, let me be clear, Mrs. Kelly's voice will not be erased." That statement, bold and simple, broke every rule of courtroom neutrality. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged. It wasn't just a ruling, it was a declaration. By evening, the headlines lit up every local channel, "Judge Caprio demands inquiry into Senator's financial scheme." The next morning, as the case moved to higher court, the nation woke to breaking news: Senator Thomas Morris had taken medical leave. The euphemism fooled no one. His son Alex vanished. The FBI had issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of fraud and forgery. Providence buzzed with disbelief. Ordinary people spoke her name in grocery lines, in barber shops, in quiet kitchens. Margaret Kelly, the woman who refused to stay silent. Later that week, she stood once more before Judge Caprio, this time in an almost empty courtroom. No cameras, no whispers, just two people who'd walked through fire. "I thought I was fighting alone," she said softly. He smiled, weary but kind. "You were never alone. You just lit the match first." She laughed through tears. Why did you take it so far, Judge? You didn't have to. Caprio leaned back, his voice gentle but firm. Because truth isn't the law. It's higher than that. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was reverence. She left the courthouse as dusk settled over Providence, the sky painted in colors that felt earned. For the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. Weeks later, a small envelope appeared in her mailbox, no return address. Inside, a single car key, worn but familiar, and a folded note with one word written in uneven handwriting. Sorry. Margaret held it in her palm for a long time, neither forgiving nor forgetting. Just breathing. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, tiny witnesses to a truth that refused to die.